The emergency session of the Galactic Council had been called within hours of the first reports reaching the capital world of Nexus Prime. Ambassador Kalith of the Zentari Empire stood before the massive circular chamber, her four arms gesticulating wildly as she addressed the assembled representatives of 47 different species. "The Vorthan Horde has broken through our third defensive line," she announced, her voice carrying the weight of desperation. "Their bioships are consuming everything in their path. Entire star systems have gone dark. We estimate they'll reach the core worlds within 30 standard cycles." A wave of concerned chittering, growling, and electronic beeping filled the chamber as the various species processed this information. The Vorthan Horde was a nightmare that had haunted galactic civilization for over 2,000 years. They appeared every few centuries like a plague of locusts, consuming organic matter and technology alike before vanishing back into the void between galaxies. Supreme Chancellor Vex, a crystalline being whose body refracted light in mesmerizing patterns, called for order with a harmonious tone that resonated through the chamber's acoustic dampeners. "What forces do we have available to mount a defense?" Admiral Thrak of the Kelvani Defense Force, a hulking reptilian creature with scarred hide, stepped forward. "Our combined fleets total approximately 8,000 vessels. The Zentari Navy has been reduced to half strength after their encounters with the Horde. The Aquilan Federation can provide another 2,000 ships, but they're primarily exploration vessels with minimal armament." "What about the Synthetic Collective?" asked Counselor Mira, representing one of the few organic species that had achieved peaceful integration with artificial intelligences. "They have withdrawn to their core systems and sealed their borders," Admiral Thrak replied grimly. "They claim the risk to their consciousness networks is too great." Chancellor Vex's crystalline form darkened, indicating deep concern. The situation was indeed dire. The Galactic Council had faced the Vorthan Horde twice before in recorded history. The first time, they had lost nearly 40% of all inhabited worlds before the Horde mysteriously retreated. The second encounter, 800 years ago, had been only marginally more successful, thanks to improved technology and better coordination. "There is one option we haven't discussed," came a voice from the back of the chamber. All heads, sensors, and optical organs turned toward the human delegation. Ambassador Sarah Chen stood up slowly, her simple black uniform contrasting sharply with the elaborate garments and natural displays of the other species. The chamber fell silent. Humans were relatively new to the Galactic Council, having achieved faster-than-light travel only 200 years ago. They were considered a minor species, contributing mainly as explorers, traders, and diplomats. Their military was small and largely untested in major galactic conflicts. "With respect, Ambassador Chen," Chancellor Vex said diplomatically, "your species, while valued members of our community, lack the industrial capacity to significantly impact this crisis. Your entire fleet consists of fewer than 500 vessels." Sarah Chen smiled, and several of the more sensitive species in the chamber felt an inexplicable chill. "I'm not talking about our fleet, Chancellor. I'm talking about our ground forces." Ambassador Kalith's feathers ruffled in confusion. "Ground forces? The Vorthan Horde fights primarily in space. Their bioships rarely make planetary landings." "That's exactly the problem," Chen replied. "For 2 millennia, the galaxy has fought the Vorthan Horde the wrong way. You meet them in space, where they have every advantage. Their bioships can adapt, evolve, and multiply during combat, but every military strategist knows that eventually, wars are won or lost on the ground." Admiral Thrak's reptilian features twisted into what might have been amusement. "Human, with all due respect to your species' military traditions, how do you propose to get ground forces onto Vorthan bioships that are actively trying to consume you?" Chen's smile widened. The same way humans have always fought when outnumbered and outgunned. We get creative. She activated a holographic display that showed detailed analysis of Vorthon bioship structure that human xenobiologists had compiled over the past century. Every Vorthon ship is essentially a massive organism. They need to feed, to breathe, to maintain internal systems. They have vulnerable points that can only be attacked from the inside. The interior of a Vorthon bioship is one of the most hostile environments known to science, protested Dr. Velm, the Aquilon Federation's chief xenobiologist. The atmosphere is toxic to most known life forms, the gravity fluctuates wildly, and the ship's immune systems attack any foreign presence. Most known life forms, Chen agreed. But humans evolved on a death world. We've been adapting to hostile environments for our entire evolutionary history. More importantly, we've been fighting wars for just as long. She manipulated the hologram to show internal schematics. Our analysis suggests that if a small team could penetrate the bioship's outer membrane and reach the central nervous cluster, they could plant a neural disruptor that would cause the entire organism to go into shock, making it vulnerable to conventional weapons. The chamber erupted into discussion. Some species were intrigued by the theoretical possibility, while others dismissed it as suicide. The biological requirements alone seemed insurmountable. Even if your theory is correct, Chancellor Vex said once order was restored, the practical challenges are enormous. How would your forces even reach the bioships? Boarding pods, Chen replied, specifically designed to mimic the organic signatures of Vorthon spawn. We've been developing them for the past 50 years, ever since our first encounter with Vorthon scouts. This caused another stir. Many council members were surprised that humans had been preparing for this scenario for so long. "And the soldiers?" asked Admiral Thrak. "What makes you think human infantry could succeed where our most advanced military technology has failed?" Sarah Chen's expression grew serious. "Because human soldiers don't just fight battles, Admiral. We win them. We've been perfecting the art of ground warfare for 10,000 years. We know how to adapt, how to improvise, and how to keep fighting when everything goes wrong." She paused, letting her words sink in before continuing. "But more than that, we understand what the Vorthon horde really is. They're not just hungry monsters. They're a collective organism that's never faced real resistance from individual units operating independently. They expect their prey to run or to fight in predictable formations. They've never encountered soldiers who think for themselves." The debate that followed lasted for hours. Species after species raised objections, concerns, and alternative proposals. But as the discussion continued, it became clear that the human plan, despite its risks, offered something that none of the conventional strategies could: hope. Finally, Chancellor Vex called for a vote. The result was closer than Chen had expected, but the measure passed. The Galactic Council would approve a joint operation, with human ground forces leading boarding actions against selected Vorthon bioships, while the combined fleet provided support and extraction. As the session concluded, and the various delegations began filing out, Ambassador Khalith approached the human delegation. "I hope you understand what you've committed to," she said quietly. "The mortality rate for this mission could be catastrophic." Sarah Chen nodded solemnly. "We understand, but that's never stopped us before." What the Galactic Council didn't know was that Earth had already been preparing for this moment. In hidden bases scattered across human space, volunteer soldiers had been training in the most extreme environments imaginable. They had studied Vorthon biology, practiced in simulated bioship environments, and undergone genetic modifications to enhance their chances of survival. These weren't just any soldiers. They were veterans of humanity's most brutal conflicts, warriors who had survived impossible odds, and volunteers who understood that they were likely walking into their graves. But they also understood that sometimes someone has to stand up and fight, regardless of the odds. The Galactic Council was about to discover what human soldiers could do when the galaxy's survival was on the line. 3 weeks after the Council session, the combined fleet assembled at the Kepler Junction, a strategic point where multiple hyperspace routes converged. The sight was both magnificent and sobering. Nearly 10,000 vessels from dozens of different species hung in formation, representing the largest military force the galaxy had ever assembled. Aboard the command vessel Eternal Vigilance, a massive Zentari dreadnought, Admiral Thrak studied the tactical displays with growing unease. The Vorthon horde had continued its relentless advance, consuming 2 more star systems in the past week. Their bioships had grown larger and more numerous with each victory, feeding on the destroyed worlds and incorporating new technologies into their ever-evolving forms. "The human contingent has arrived," reported his aide, Lieutenant Kresh. Thrak looked up from the displays, his reptilian features creasing with curiosity. The human ships were small by galactic standards, utilitarian vessels that looked more like freight haulers than military craft. There were only 12 of them, carrying what intelligence reports suggested was a force of approximately 3,000 soldiers. 3,000, he muttered to himself, against an enemy that has consumed billions. Captain Marcus Rodriguez materialized on the bridge via holographic transmission. The human was compact and weathered, with scars visible on his face and hands. His uniform was simple military fatigues, lacking the ceremonial elements favored by most galactic officers. "Admiral Thrak," Rodriguez said with a crisp salute. "Captain Rodriguez reporting. The 1st Expeditionary Force is ready for deployment." "Captain, I must ask again if you're certain about this strategy. Our intelligence suggests the largest Vorthon bioships now exceed 50 kilometers in length. They're essentially living space stations." Rodriguez's expression didn't change. "Size works against them, Admiral. Bigger targets are easier to hit, and larger organisms have more vulnerable points. My soldiers are prepared for the mission." Over the past 3 weeks, Rodriguez had been working with the combined fleet's xenobiologists and tactical specialists, refining their approach. The humans had shared intelligence they'd been gathering for decades, revealing a depth of preparation that had surprised many council members. "Show me your soldiers," Thrak requested. The holographic display shifted to show the interior of one of the human vessels. Thrak's breath caught in his throat. The humans moving through the ship were unlike anything he had expected. They were heavily modified, their bodies adapted for the specific challenges of Vorthon bioship infiltration. Each soldier wore a specialized suit that seemed to blend organic and technological elements. The suits could adjust their thermal and chemical signatures to mimic Vorthon's spawn, making them invisible to the bioship's immune systems. More importantly, the humans themselves had undergone extensive genetic modification. Sergeant Elena Vasquez checked her equipment one final time. Her enhanced lungs could process the toxic atmospheres found inside Vorthan's ships. Her modified nervous system could resist the psychic interference that the bioships used to disorient intruders. Her reinforced skeleton could withstand the crushing gravitational shifts that occurred during bioship combat maneuvers. But the most significant modification wasn't physical. Like all members of the Expeditionary Force, Vasquez had undergone cognitive enhancement that allowed her to maintain individual thought and decision-making even when exposed to Vorthon collective consciousness fields. "Listen up," Rodriguez addressed his assembled force via neural link. "This is what we've been training for. Each team will target a different bioship. Your objective is simple. Penetrate the outer membrane, navigate to the central nervous cluster, and plant your neural disruptor. The disruption will create a cascade failure throughout the organism." He paused, looking at the faces around him. These weren't just soldiers. They were volunteers who had known from the beginning that this mission would likely be their last. "Remember your training. Vorthon bioships fight using collective tactics. They expect their enemies to act as a unified force. That's their weakness. You're going to hit them as individuals, making decisions they can't predict or counter. Private Jake Morrison, barely 21, but already a veteran of 3 colonial conflicts, raised his hand. Sir, what about extraction? Extraction will be attempted once the neural disruptors activate, Rodriguez replied honestly, but don't count on it. These ships have redundant systems and will likely try to purge foreign elements even as they die. Your best chance of survival is to complete the mission quickly and find your own way out. The briefing continued for another hour, covering contingencies, backup plans, and emergency protocols. But everyone in the room understood the reality. This was a suicide mission dressed up as a military operation. Meanwhile, on the bridge of the Eternal Vigilance, the command staff watched in fascination as human boarding pods were loaded into launch tubes. The pods themselves were works of art, biomechanical constructs that perfectly mimicked the appearance and energy signatures of Vorthon's spawn. How did they develop this technology? Wondered Dr. Velm, who had been transferred to the command vessel to observe the human tactics. They've been planning this for 50 years, Ambassador Chen explained. She had remained with the fleet to coordinate between human forces and the Council military. Ever since our first encounter with Vorthon scouts, our military strategists have been developing countermeasures. 50 years, Admiral Thrak repeated. You've been preparing for a war that might never come. Chen smiled grimly. Admiral, humans have been preparing for wars that might never come since we first picked up sticks and stones. It's what we do. The tactical display suddenly erupted with new contacts. The Vorthan horde had arrived ahead of schedule, dropping out of hyperspace in a formation that defied conventional military doctrine. The bioships moved like a living constellation, their organic hulls pulsing with bioluminescent patterns that served as both communication and intimidation. "My God!" whispered someone on the bridge as the full scope of the enemy force became clear. There were hundreds of bioships, ranging from frigate-sized organisms to the massive capital ships that resembled floating cities. They moved with predatory grace, already beginning to adjust their formations in response to the Council fleet's presence. "All vessels, this is Admiral Thrak. Assume defensive formation Delta 7. Do not engage until my command." On the human ships, soldiers were making final preparations. Rodriguez watched through the ship's sensors as the Vorthon fleet approached. The bioships were even more impressive in person than in the intelligence reports. Their hulls writhed with muscular contractions, and he could see smaller organisms swimming through the space around them like antibodies protecting a larger host. "Captain," came Vasquez's voice over the comm. "Teams Alpha through Delta are ready for launch." Rodriguez took a deep breath. In all his years of military service, he had never faced an enemy quite like this, but he had also never served with soldiers quite like these. "Launch pods," he ordered. The first wave of human boarding pods shot out from their carriers, their organic exteriors making them nearly indistinguishable from the Vorthon spawn that constantly moved between bioships. The pods used no conventional propulsion, instead undulating through space in perfect mimicry of the enemy's biological movement. The Vorthon fleet's defensive response was immediate but misdirected. Energy weapons lashed out at the Council fleet, while the bioships began releasing clouds of defensive organisms. But they paid no attention to the small, apparently biological objects drifting toward their hulls. Rodriguez watched the tactical display as the first pods made contact with their targets. The bioship's defensive membranes parted automatically, recognizing what appeared to be returning spawn. One by one, the green dots representing human teams disappeared inside the massive enemy vessels. "First phase complete," he reported to Admiral Thrak. "All teams have successfully penetrated their targets." "Remarkable," Thrak muttered. "Now what happens?" "Now we find out if human soldiers can do what human politicians promised," Rodriguez replied. Inside the bioships, the real battle was just beginning. Each team found themselves in an environment that challenged every aspect of their training and modification. The corridors were not corridors, but living passages that contracted and expanded with the ship's breathing. The air was thick with spores and biological agents designed to break down foreign matter. Sergeant Vasquez led her team through what appeared to be a major arterial passage, following the neural map they had memorized during training. The walls around them pulsed with a rhythm that seemed almost hypnotic, and she could feel the ship's collective consciousness pressing against her modified mind like a living thing. "Stay focused," she whispered into her comm unit. "Don't let it get into your head." Behind her, 3 other soldiers moved in perfect coordination, their weapons ready, but not yet drawn. The neural disruptor they carried was a masterpiece of human engineering, designed to interface with Vorthon nervous systems and create a cascade failure that would paralyze the entire organism. They had been inside the bioship for nearly an hour when they encountered their first major obstacle. A massive sphincter-like valve blocked their path, its biological sensors apparently detecting something unusual about their presence. "It knows we're here," whispered Corporal Chen, the team's tech specialist. Vasquez studied the obstacle, then smiled. "No, it suspects something but doesn't know what. Watch and learn." She approached the valve and began mimicking the chemical signals that Vorthon spawn used to identify themselves. Her suit's biological interfaces, developed through decades of research, produced the exact pheromone combinations needed to convince the valve that she was a returning spawn carrying important genetic material. The valve dilated, allowing them passage into the ship's central nervous chamber. The sight that greeted them defied description. The chamber was vast, filled with hanging neural clusters that pulsed with bioluminescent patterns. Streams of information flowed between the clusters like visible thoughts, creating a symphony of light and biochemical signals. "Target acquired," Vasquez reported quietly. "Beginning neural disruptor placement." What happened next would become legend among human military forces for generations to come. Inside the bioship's neural chamber, Sergeant Vasquez and her team worked with surgical precision. The neural disruptor was a complex device that needed to interface directly with the ship's primary consciousness node. As Corporal Chen calibrated the device's biological interfaces, the ship began to react to their presence. The chamber filled with a low, harmonious sound that seemed to come from the neural clusters themselves. Vasquez felt the collective consciousness of the bioship pressing against her modified mind, trying to understand what she was and why she didn't respond to its commands. "Hurry," she whispered to Chen. "It's starting to figure out we're not supposed to be here." The walls around them began to shift, and Vasquez could see defensive organisms flowing through the transparent passages that lined the chamber. The ship was mobilizing its immune system, but slowly, as if confused by signals it couldn't quite interpret. "Got it," Chen said, activating the neural disruptor. The device extended organic tendrils that penetrated the central consciousness node, beginning the cascade sequence that would paralyze the entire organism. The effect was immediate and dramatic. The bioship's harmonious song became a discordant wail as its nervous system went into shock. Throughout the massive organism, automatic functions began to fail. The ship's bioluminescent patterns flickered and died, and its graceful movement through space became an uncontrolled tumble. Aboard the Eternal Vigilance, Admiral Thrak watched in amazement as one of the largest Vorthon bioships suddenly stopped moving, its hull going dark, except for sporadic flickers of dying neural activity. "Direct hit on target Alpha 1. Reported the sensor operator. "The bioship appears to be in complete neural shutdown." Before Thrak could respond, more reports flooded in. Throughout the Vorthon formation, bioships were succumbing to neural disruption as human teams reached their objectives. The sight was unprecedented in recorded galactic history. "Target Alpha 3 is down." Alpha 7 showing massive neural cascade failure. Alpha 2 has gone completely dark. Captain Rodriguez monitored the reports with professional satisfaction, tinged by sadness. Each success meant his soldiers had reached their objectives, but it also meant they were now trapped inside dying organisms that would likely take them down as well. "Sir," came Vasquez's voice over the comm, distorted by interference from the bioship's dying nervous system. "Neural disruptor successfully deployed. Ship is entering cascade failure. Attempting extraction route Bravo." Rodriguez knew that extraction route Bravo was a desperate gamble. The plan called for the team to fight their way to one of the bioship's feeding orifices and attempt to escape before the organism's death spasms sealed all openings. Throughout the Vorthan fleet, the loss of major bioships was creating panic. The collective consciousness that linked the horde was receiving confusing and contradictory signals as ship after ship fell victim to neural disruption. For the first time in their recorded history, the Vorthan horde was experiencing fear. The remaining bioships began to change their tactics, clustering together for mutual protection and releasing clouds of defensive organisms. But their collective behavior was exactly what the human strategists had anticipated. "Admiral," Rodriguez called to Thrak, "now would be an excellent time for your fleet to engage. The horde is confused and trying to regroup. They're vulnerable." Thrak needed no further encouragement. "All vessels, this is Admiral Thrak. Begin general engagement. Target the clustered bioships while they're disoriented." The Council fleet opened fire with every weapon at their disposal. Energy beams, kinetic projectiles, and exotic matter warheads slammed into the Vorthan formation. Bioships that had seemed invulnerable just hours before were now taking massive damage, their adaptive defenses overwhelmed by the combination of neural disruption and conventional attack. Inside the dying bioships, the surviving human teams were fighting for their lives. Vasquez led her team through passages that were collapsing as the organism's structural integrity failed. Behind them, the ship's immune system was finally mobilizing, sending waves of antibody organisms in pursuit. "Left here!" Chen shouted over the sound of the bioship's death agonies. The passages around them were contracting rhythmically as the organism tried to purge foreign elements from its system. They reached a junction where 3 passages converged, and Vasquez could see light ahead, the bioluminescent glow of one of the ship's feeding orifices. But between them and escape was a wall of defensive organisms, antibody creatures the size of small vehicles that moved with predatory intelligence. "Light them up," Vasquez ordered. The human weapons were specifically designed for this environment. Instead of conventional energy weapons that the bioship could potentially adapt to, they used targeted viruses and biological agents that attacked specific Vorthan cellular structures. The firefight was brief but intense. The antibody organisms were tough and aggressive, but they had evolved to deal with microscopic threats, not armed soldiers with military training. Within minutes, the passage was clear. Vasquez's team reached the feeding orifice just as the bioship entered its final death throes. The massive organism was convulsing, its hull cracking as internal pressures fluctuated wildly. "Emergency extraction beacon activated," Chen reported, triggering a device that would signal their location to any nearby council vessels. They leap out of the dying bioship into the void of space, their suits' limited life support systems activating automatically. Around them, the battle raged on as the Council fleet pressed its advantage against the disoriented Vorthan horde. One by one, human teams across the battlefield were either extracted by rescue vessels or went silent as their bioship targets succumbed to neural cascade failure. The casualty rate was horrific. Nearly 70% of the human soldiers were lost in the mission. But their sacrifice had achieved something that conventional warfare could not. The Vorthan horde was retreating. For the first time in recorded galactic history, the bioships were abandoning their attack and withdrawing toward deep space. The loss of so many major vessels, combined with the psychological trauma of having their collective consciousness disrupted, had broken their will to fight. Admiral Thrak watched the withdrawal with a mixture of triumph and disbelief. "They're actually running," he said to no one in particular. Captain Rodriguez, now aboard the rescue vessel that had picked up the survivors of Vasquez's team, joined the command conference via hologram. His face was grim despite their victory. "The immediate threat has been neutralized," he reported. "But this was just one horde fleet. Intelligence suggests there are others, and they'll have learned from this encounter." "What do you recommend?" asked Ambassador Chen. "We need to prepare for their return," Rodriguez said. "This bought us time, maybe decades, but the Vorthan will adapt. They always do." Sergeant Vasquez, her suit still showing damage from her escape, stepped forward. "With respect, sir, let them adapt. Humans have been adapting longer." 3 months later, the Galactic Council met in emergency session once again. But this time, the atmosphere was entirely different. Instead of panic and desperation, there was cautious hope and newfound respect. Ambassador Chen stood before the assembly, but she was no longer representing a minor species. The human delegation now occupied seats in the front row, and when she spoke, the chamber listened with careful attention. "The Vorthan threat is not over," she began. "Our xenobiologists estimate that the horde will return within 20 to 30 standard years, probably with adaptations designed to counter our neural disruption tactics." "What does humanity propose?" asked Chancellor Vex. "A joint training program," Chen replied. "We share our ground warfare expertise with volunteers from all Council species, and you share your advanced technology with us. When the Vorthan return, we'll be ready with tactics they've never seen before." The proposal was revolutionary. For millennia, the different species of the galaxy had fought as separate entities, each using their own traditions and technologies. The idea of truly integrated military forces was almost unthinkable. "The biological requirements alone would be enormous," protested Dr. Velm. "Most species cannot undergo the modifications necessary for bioship infiltration." "Then we adapt the tactics to the species," Chen replied. "Aquilans excel at environmental analysis, perfect for intelligence gathering inside bioships. Zentari have multiple appendages, ideal for complex equipment operation in hostile environments. Kelvani are naturally resistant to biological agents." She gestured to a holographic display showing theoretical integrated units. "We don't need every species to become like humans. We need every species to become the best version of themselves." The debate that followed was lengthy and sometimes heated, but as the hours passed, it became clear that the galaxy had fundamentally changed. The Vortan horde's retreat had shattered millennia of assumptions about military doctrine and interspecies cooperation. When the vote was finally called, the measure passed by an overwhelming margin. The Galactic Defense Initiative would be established, with joint training facilities and integrated command structures. But perhaps more importantly, humanity's role in galactic society had been permanently transformed. They were no longer the small, inexperienced species that had stumbled onto the galactic stage 2 centuries ago. They had become the teachers of war, the species that other civilizations turned to when conventional wisdom failed. In the months that followed, human military advisors spread throughout Council space, sharing not just tactics and techniques, but a fundamental philosophy that had served their species well. When faced with impossible odds, you don't surrender. You get creative. The veterans who had survived the bioship mission became legends, not just among humans, but throughout the galaxy. Their willingness to sacrifice themselves for species they had barely known proved that courage and honor were not limited to any single race. And in the deep reaches of space, where the Vorthan horde licked its wounds and planned its return, ancient collective consciousnesses struggled to understand what had happened. For the first time in their existence, They had encountered prey that fought back not as a collective, but as individuals. They had met soldiers who thought for themselves, adapted on the fly, and refused to give up even when victory seemed impossible. The Horde would return eventually. It was their nature. But when they did, they would face not just the scattered defenses of frightened civilizations, but the combined might of a galaxy that had learned to fight like humans. And that, as any human veteran could tell you, made all the difference.